this little town, Bethlehem. You know, as the prophet Micah says, as part of our title, this little town of Bethlehem, though there be little amongst the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee will come the ruler of the world. What an amazing little town it is. It's a pretty little place, pretty place. Have you been there? Who's been there? It's a very, quite a few. It's a very pretty little town. It's gone up above 20,000 people now. And of course it's in the Palestinian territories, but it's, we were there quite some time ago, but it's still strong in the memory. A beautiful little town. Just in the rolling hills, just south of Jerusalem, about 4 or 5 miles south of Jerusalem. And it was the place of all the little towns in all the world. Why was it that God chose this to be the birthplace of his Son? Well, we'll be building towards that, and we'll certainly be looking at that on Sunday morning. Why Bethlehem? And there are some very, very special reasons. So let's look at the background a little bit, and we are going to cover Bethlehem right from the time that Jacob and Rachel are heading towards Bethlehem, through the book of Judges, and a number of events in the book of Judges that build up to David being born in Bethlehem. And then we'll follow through some other interesting characters associated with Bethlehem until we come to the birth of Jesus. And ultimately, the last real occasion it's mentioned is in relation to the visit of the wise men. So that's our theme. That's the path that we're looking at. And as we said, there are going to be a lot of interesting things that are going to come to our attention as we have a look at this. What a wonderful town that we haven't thought too much about. I haven't thought too much about it until about, I suppose, 8 or 9 years ago. Well, we are looking, as we said, at shocks and inspiration from the town of Jesus' birth. Yes, there are some shocks, some surprising things, some terrible things that are associated with Bethlehem in the Old Testament scriptures. And we learn lessons from all of those, of course. So our theme is to look tonight at the well of Bethlehem. So we're partway through the history of Bethlehem. Tomorrow afternoon, Rachel's tomb, and then Bethlehem, Judah, which really encompasses the time during the period of the Judges, where the town is called Bethlehem, Judah. It's the same town, but the emphasis is that it's in Judah's territory. And that's important in some of those stories, because it's right on the fringe, the border between Benjamin's territory, and Judah's territory. But it is in Judah, of course, because we know that the Lord sprang out of Judah. Then we'll be looking at the babe in the manger, the birth of the Lord Jesus Christ, and some of the really exciting things. Well, it's very exciting. What more exciting could there be than the birth of the Son of God? But some wonderful lessons that come in relation to that. Some things which really strike home to us when we look closely at all the circumstances around his birth and why it was he was born in that particular place. And then the visit of the wise men. So, Bethlehem is David's town. David born and raised in a wide family circle, actually, in Bethlehem. By the time we get to the birth of David and his family, it's quite a substantial family that's been developed. It started, of course, with Elimelech and Naomi, and they blended with the family of wealthy Boaz, as he's called, a man of wealth, Ruth chapter 2. Boaz was actually called a mighty man of wealth. The word wealth is translated valor on numerous occasions. He was a mighty man of valor, a Gibor-ish. And of course, from him comes David. Gideon was a mighty man of valor. Jephthah was a mighty man of valor. A couple of people we're going to be looking at, actually, in our study tomorrow. But interestingly, the same word valor is used of Ruth when the word is translated a virtuous woman. Everybody knows, says Boaz, that you're a virtuous woman. You're a woman of valor. Remember, she was a Moabitess. And the Moabites were known as people of valor. Interesting, and even their women were known as people of valour, but in this case, people of virtue. Ruth chapter 3 verse 11. Everybody knows you are a woman of valour, a virtuous woman. Of course, the same as in the Proverbs chapter 31. Who can find a virtuous woman? Well, Ruth was certainly a classic example, we might say, of the virtuous woman. And from her, we said, came many of the people of Bethlehem, in particular, of course, King David we'll be looking at. The Moabites were called lusty men of valour. Yeah, lusty men of valour. They were quite mighty fighters. Many of the Moabites, in Judges chapter 3, there were 10,000 of them that were put, well, lusty men of valour. Lusty, we know, lusty can also mean, of course, fat. As was Eglon, a lusty king of valour. Okay. Ruth, when you put Ruth and Boaz together, and you have got a mighty family, the beginnings of a formidable family, mighty people of valour, that developed Bethlehem. So Bethlehem actually becomes the home of a very, very substantial family of people. Began with small beginnings, but grew into a very strong family and a great centre for the truth. A great centre for the development of spiritual growth in that area of Judah. They were exemplary in terms of their spirituality in the days of David. His family was a strong family, a family prepared to fight for right principles, a fight for the truth, and to establish and to put David, once they knew that he was chosen, to put David upon the throne. And it began in this little town of Bethlehem. Well, remember, a bit of background now. 1 Samuel 22, let's turn to it. 1 Samuel 22, and we have the early times of David. And he actually flees, of course, from Saul. Jonathan warns David to flee from Saul. Remember, the agreement was that Jonathan would find out just what was at the back of Saul's motives, because he doubted that his father really wanted to destroy David, but David said, no, that's the truth. So David wasn't going to show up for the meal with King Saul, and Jonathan was going to explain that he needed to go to his city to keep an annual feast with his family in Bethlehem. Matter of fact, by the way, in the Old Testament, that's the only time that Bethlehem is called the city of David. By Jonathan, who says, oh, you're going to go to his city and be with his family. That's the only time that Bethlehem is the city of David in the Old Testament. So of course, the agreement was, if the arrows are beyond you, that means that Saul is really out to slay David, and David has to run. And Jonathan and David have their little time together, and David hasn't had much time to prepare, so he's off. He runs. And he comes to Nob, and he's hungry, and a few that are with him, they're hungry, they're thirsty, he's given the showbread, and he takes Goliath's sword. And where does he go next? It's hard to imagine. He goes to Goliath's hometown with Goliath's sword. You wonder what's at the back of his mind here. But maybe he's sort of thinking, well, the people of Gath are going to accept me now, because I'm returning sword of Goliath, and I want to make amends with them, because after all we've got a common enemy in Saul. Well, they wouldn't accept him, would they? And of course he has to feign madness and scrabble on the wall and somehow or other escape. Where does he go? Well, he can't go home to Bethlehem, because he knows that Saul will be looking for him there straight away. So he goes to the top of the valley of Elah. Same place where he had slain Goliath, in the valley of Elah. At the top of the valley, there is the cave of Adullam. And there, David of course knows that the territory, he knows the geography of the area, it's not far from Bethlehem. And he knows that that is a place that he can establish himself and be hidden and protect himself against any attack or attention from Saul. So he's in the cave of Adullam. There we are. The valley of Elah runs in about that direction. It's not quite as straight as that little rectangle there. It wiggles down through from up in the northwest and down to the cave, and up actually to the cave of Adullam. And that's his place of protection. You can see that it's not too far from Bethlehem, and David knew the territory really, really well. He knew he could hide there. He put quite a number of people together in that cave area, that labyrinth of caves that is the cave of Adullam. I believe it's hard to find the cave of Adullam. We didn't try to find it when we were there, but others have, and I believe one or two have found what they understand is the cave of Adullam. It's not signposted, but anyway, it's obviously a good place to hide. So David is fleeing, and we read there that in verses 1 and 2 of 1 Samuel 22, he departs thence and he escapes to the cave Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard of it, they went down thither to him. And everyone that was in distress, and everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented, gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them, and there were with him about 400 men. So David has a family of warriors, we know that. At least the three others were in the army, and they were all quite capable people. They were warriors, the family of Jesse. Many broken and discontented souls came there. The marginal people, the outcasts, a bit like Paul says, the offscouring of the earth. Is the ecclesia, we're the outcasts, aren't we? As far as the world is concerned, we are the outcasts. And we do need to gather together and protect each other in this ecclesial environment. Well, the world is encroaching upon us more and more and more. And if there was a King Saul out there, it's the leaders of this world, and they are really out to get religion. They're like Christian Elkins. There's no doubt about it, brothers and sisters. We are the outcasts of the world, and we all need to gather together and strengthen one another in our stronghold. And our stronghold is the ecclesias that we're in. So here is David, and he's a captain over 400 desperate men. You all feel desperate? I think sometimes in this world we feel desperate. So they come over to David, and David's got to shape them now and fashion them and turn them into a solid, strong ecclesia. That's what he's going to do. The Adullam ecclesia. And they became transformed into David's mighty men. We read some of them here, didn't we? The 30, but there were others as well. David's mighty men, there's 400 of them that he's now shaping into a force to be reckoned with in the ecclesia in that day. The cave of Adullam. Now he writes a psalm. Let's have a look at this psalm. Psalm 142. We won't look at Psalm 57, I'll just quote that. Look at Psalm 142. This is the psalm he writes when he's in the cave. Psalm 142. In the superscription, we read that it's a psalm or a prayer, in fact, when he was in the cave. So, and notice this, he says, I cried unto Yahweh with my voice unto Yahweh did I make my supplication, I poured out my complaint before him, I showed before him my trouble. So he's in a strait, isn't he? He's in terrible strait, really, and this is the only home that he's got now. And his family has come to be with him, which is interesting. They've all come down knowing where he was and how they could all join together and help protect him, but also themselves from what was happening with Saul. Now in verse 4, David says, I looked on my right hand and beheld, but there was no man. Where have we heard that expression before? No man. God looked and there was no man. Therefore, his arm brought salvation. No doubt about that. That's the thought. So this is the Messianic psalm of the Lord Jesus Christ in his time of difficulty. Verse 7, bring my soul out of prison, that I may praise thy name. The righteous shall compass me about, for thou shalt deal bountifully with me. Of course, that's the portends the resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ and the brethren being gathered together to him. But David in the cave is gathering together righteous men around him. They're strugglers, they're battlers, but they're righteous men who want to be with him, starting out as misfits, but They're going to grow into a great group of people to be with David. Psalm 57 is also written, okay, be merciful to me, O God, be merciful unto me, for my soul trusteth in thee. You know this is in the hymn, don't we? Yea, in the shadow of thy wings will I make my refuge until these calamities be overpast. So there are calamities coming upon David. But in this labyrinth of caves, and I believe that is a photograph of the cave, the home of the Adullam Ecclesia in David's day. And you can imagine it's very easy to protect, hard to find first of all, but very easy to protect. Now, the house of David is, the family, particularly that top line there, is full of very, very strong and courageous people. Of course, there are the two sisters of David, Abigail and Zeruiah. Abigail, son of Amasa. From Zeruiah, the three, Abishai, Joab and Asahel. We know all of them, of course. Abishai, the great warrior, and Joab, who became the general of the army, and Asahel, who was swift as a deer when he ran. And other sons, Eliab the eldest, of course, the other sons, and Shimeah, and his sons, Jonathan, who was a good warrior too. Jonadab, unfortunately, gave wicked counsel to Amnon. And there are uncles and others that are mentioned in the scriptures who are very, very strong and interesting people. All of them. Some of them are very hard to work out their character, but most of them, in most cases, very supportive of David, very strong and willing to fight for the things of the truth. Now, when we have a look at the circumstance back in 1 Samuel 22, where we are, we read that from verse 3, David went to Mizpah, and he said to the king of Moab, let my father and my mother, I pray thee, come forth and be with you till I know what God will do for me. And he brought them before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the while that David was in the hold. So David's got his base at Adullam, and all the family had left Bethlehem now, and Bethlehem becomes very vulnerable. Very vulnerable, because all the fighting men, you might say, the family of David and beyond, came down to David in the cave of Adullam. But his parents, of course, were a little older, and they couldn't live in the cave, so David had to do something for them. Everyone in distress, discontented, joined him there, but in case harm came to his parents, because the logical thing would be that Saul would come to take his parents and maybe torture them, or at least, cause distress to them to try and get them to tell them where David is. So he arranges a safe haven over in Moab. They could have been captured, they could have been killed or held for ransom. So he arranges for them to go to Moab. Why Moab? Why Moab? Well, because his grandmother came from there. Ruth came from Moab, and she must have been from a fairly important family in Moab, because it was easy to communicate to the king of Moab and have his mum and dad find safety with the king of Moab. So we're saying that Ruth was of some substance, or her family was, in Moab, so that the king of Moab would recognise the members of the family of the Moabites, Ruth, and would keep the family there safe. So his parents might never have gone back to Bethlehem, in fact. They might not have gone back until, as David said, till I find out what God's going to do with me. But of course he was made king in Hebron, and his parents may well have stayed in Moab until David was made the king. At least we know that there is a tomb in Hebron, which you can visit today, the tomb called the tomb of Ruth and Jesse. That may be so, may not be so, but that's certainly a possibility. And so they were buried in Hebron later on, after David was elevated to become king in Hebron. Now, as we said, Bethlehem has become vulnerable. The mighty men have left their homes from Bethlehem. They've gone down to be with David in the stronghold of Adullam. And they've started to become prominent there, and they become mighty men. with David. Much later on, it was still the mighty men of Bethlehem, who were the great warriors of Israel, who conquered the giants. And we'll look at that later on. The fact that others from Bethlehem conquered more of the giants of the Philistines. So David is coming to power over all Israel. Saul and Jonathan have been killed in the battle. David reigns in Hebron for 7 years. Abner kills Asahel, Joab's brother. Remember what happened there? Asahel is running quickly behind Abner. Abner was pretty quick, but Asahel was catching up on him. He said to Asahel, don't come so close, don't come so close. He's running on, he's got his spear straight through Asahel. And Joab, of course, never forgave Abner for that and dealt with him later on as a result. But Asahel had been a wonderful warrior for David, and he was actually buried in Bethlehem. He's buried in Bethlehem. So even though at that time there was a question as to whether or not Bethlehem was a place where you could safely live and be buried, Asahel is buried in Bethlehem, because he's a man of Bethlehem. Abner then has a falling out with Ishbosheth, and he decides, it's of course down through Saul, Ishbosheth, so we're still talking about the northern tribes there. He was the king of the northern tribes, but Abner has a falling out with him, and he comes to David and proposes a league with David for David to be king over all Israel. David says, well, that's okay, that's fine, but to prove that you're genuine, I want Michal to be brought back to me as my wife. That would indicate that he had some influence over what was going on in the northern tribes to bring Michal back to be his wife again. Now, this wasn't something that David really wanted Michal to be back, because he never ever went near her afterwards, but at least it was to prove that Abner had some control and would be able to deliver the northern tribes to him. So yes, he does. Abner brings him back. But then Joab can see what's going on and pay back for the death of Asahel. So he suspects that Abner is going to take over, having done a deal with David, and cut Joab out of the equation, so he murders Abner. Ruthless. And David famously says, Joab is just too ruthless. You sons of Zeruiah are too ruthless for me, too hard for me. But of course, David showed in his actions that he was not supportive of what Joab had done to Abner. Well, next thing, Ishbosheth is killed by two of his own captains. They were terrible times, aren't they? Really, terrible times of infighting. This is, by the way, the ecclesia of God, and this is what's going on in those days. So he's killed by his captains. Again, David wants to show that he wasn't behind that, so his murderers are executed by David. Murder a man, a man in his bed, he wouldn't support that at all. So then, all of Israel sees the character of David. And he reigns over all Israel, and he desires that he's going to make Jerusalem his capital. He knew that it should be. It was the place that Yahweh had chosen to place his name there, wasn't it? He knew that Melchizedek had reigned as the king of Salem. He knew that it was intended that that should be his capital. So, of course, they do take the city of Jerusalem. Joab finds the secret route into the city and climbs up, the shaft and into the city, and they take the city of Jerusalem. This frightens the Philistines. The Philistines think it's kind of now or never. You've got David reigning over the whole nation, and he's captured Jerusalem, a city that couldn't otherwise be captured, they thought. They now have to get rid of David. The Philistines have to gather together and get rid of David. In the meantime, they had already taken Bethlehem, David's city. They've established a garrison in Bethlehem. So Bethlehem is now in the hands of the Philistines, in open defiance of David. And the Philistines are now going to gather together in this valley of Rephaim. The valley of Rephaim, to do battle with David. They're going to go up to Jerusalem and endeavour to conquer Jerusalem and take it from David. So let's go to 2 Samuel chapter 5. 2 Samuel chapter 5. Read there in the first verse that the tribes have come to Hebron and made David king over all Israel. Here we are. Behold, thy bone and thy flesh. When Saul was king over us, thou wast he that led us out and brought us in Israel. And Yahweh said to thee, thou shalt feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be captain over Israel. So they all came. They made a league with David, and they made him king over Israel, and he's 30 years old. In Hebron, in verse 5, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months. In Jerusalem, 33 years over all Israel. And then we read in verse 6 that the king and his men went to Jerusalem, and the Jebusites, of course, mocked David, and they succeeded in taking the city. So we come to verse 7, nevertheless David took the stronghold of Zion, the same is the city of David. And down in verse 17, when the Philistines heard that they had anointed David king over Israel, all the Philistines came up to seek David. And David heard of it, and he went down to the hole. Where's the hole? The cave of Adullam, isn't it? So even though he established it in Jerusalem, he knows that to plan his strategy, to get closer to God in that cave, to gather his men around him in a secret place, they could plan what they're going to do with these Philistines, with this attack that they know is coming. So he goes down, he retreats down to the cave of Adullam, and the Philistines are spread in the valley of Rephaim. Now Rephaim means the giants. And so the giants are there in the army with the Philistines. And David inquired of Yahweh, saying, shall I go up to the Philistines? Wilt thou deliver them into my hand? Yahweh said, go up. I will doubtless deliver the Philistines into thy hands. And in verse 20 we read, David came to Baal Perazim. Right, the names are interesting. Baal Perazim. And David smote them there and said, Yahweh hath broken forth upon mine enemies before me as the breach of waters. The breach of waters. Therefore he called the name of that place Baal Perazim, which means Lord of the breaches. The breaches of waters. The place is also called Mount Perazim. Mount Perazim, where the waters brought forth. Now remember, David's in the cave of Adullam with a large contingent of men, and the Philistines are in the valley of Rephaim, which is just up there, running from just outside Jerusalem and down to the southwest toward the cave of Adullam. That's the valley of Rephaim, also the river of Rephaim, and Mount Perazim. So Rephaim is the giants, Perazim the breach of waters. Okay, they're coming up from Adullam, and David is asking, will I go up? God says yes. And there'll be a breach of waters. Now that's interesting. Here is the valley and the river of Rephaim today. And as we said, it's just outside of Jerusalem, running down southwest. And there's a river there, Nahal Rephaim in the Hebrew. And it's a winter river only. It's a winter river. It's dry in the summer and in the warmer months. It only flows in the river. And when it flows, it often provides flash flooding. Lots of water rushing down. There's a couple of photographs of that there. That's the valley of Rephaim. Obviously not a big flash flood, but it's a big enough flash flood. Comes rushing down there. Sudden flash flooding happens in the winter months. And the name is, of course, the rushing forth of waters. So this is what's happened. This is the timing. Just to get an idea. You've probably got this insert. You've seen this insert in your Bible. They're available. This is the winter months, okay, where there's heavy rains. That's when the river of Rephaim flows, okay. Now, that's our November through to February, which is the winter over there, time of Parker there, through to Purim there, and then of course you do get some light rains around the harvest time, the latter rains. We get some light rains at the beginning for planting, and grain planting about here. Then the main heavy rains, and then we're through to the warmer months and a little bit of rain just before the harvest. That's the seasons. They're constant seasons, or they certainly were in Israel's day. So what happens is that the Philistines are put to flight when their sudden flash flood comes rushing down the valley. Now here's another look at that Hebrew calendar. Again, the month Chislew, which is our November, December, the rain increases and gets stronger and stronger. Well, this is when these things happen. Philistines are defeated the first time, but they do come again. A second time when it's dry. They think, well, okay, everything got washed away the first time. Matter of fact, they had to leave all their idols and so on there, and after the flash flood went past, we're told that David and his people burnt all those idols. So if they came back to the same valley looking for the idols, they weren't there anymore, which would have made them very angry again. In the meantime, just as it's getting very dry, David thirsts. There's mention of a mighty man who held a ground of lentils. I'll just put that there because that's not shown when the lentils are harvested. There's a whole field full of lentils, and one of David's mighty men held that ground against hundreds of Philistines. Well, so the first time the Philistines have come and they're defeated is in that time when it's heavy rain, and they weren't expecting that great flood. So that came down the valley. Well, what happens next? The Philistines come again. Philistines come again. And in 1 Chronicles chapter 11, which is the parallel to what we read in 2 Samuel 23, let's have a look at it. 1 Chronicles chapter 11, we've got a description of what happens here. They come and made David king, that's in verse 1. Come down to verse 15. 3 of the 30 captains, as David is thirsting, and the Philistines have come again, 3 of the 30 captains went down to the rock to David, to the cave of Adullam. And the host of the Philistines encamped in the valley of Bethlehem. They've come back to the same place, the same valley. And they're going to try and attack David in Jerusalem again. David's down in the cave again. They came down to the hold, and the Philistines' garrison in verse 16 was at Bethlehem. And David longed and said, "Oh, that one would give me drink of the water of the well of Bethlehem that is at the gates." You can imagine David thinking of his youth. I mean, he's there, and he's really got a terrible problem now. The Philistines have come back angrier than ever. How is he going to hold Jerusalem? How is he going to hold the people together at this terrible time? And as he's planning again the strategy in the cave, he thinks, what are those Philistines doing in Bethlehem? Of all places, my hometown. They've put their garrison there. I remember when I was young and I'd been out in the field and I'd bring the sheep back into the gate of the town, and we'd sit around the well there, and the well was at the gate, and I'd listen to the wisdom of the elders of Bethlehem, because they would always meet at the gate. Remember, Boaz met the elders at the gate, didn't he, when he said, "I'm going to marry Ruth." And they all gave assent to that. Of course, the closer relatives didn't want to get involved. But he said, "I'm going to marry Ruth. She is a virtuous woman, and we're going to raise up seed, a godly seed." And of course, all the people said, "Amen." And David would have been aware of all the things that took place at that gate, as the elders would have discussed the scriptures there, as there were scribes in Bethlehem. We'll see that later on, who would have been talking about the things of God at the gate of Bethlehem, and drinking from that living water that was there. And we saw the picture of the well with the three little openings at the top. The well is still there, and apparently the water is still just as fresh and lovely as it was thousands of years ago in David's day. That feeling of being home in a wonderful spiritual surrounding around that well. It wasn't just that he was thirsty, And he thirsted for the time of his youth, when he'd had such a lovely time when his family was around that well. It was a central place, that's where people gathered. And so the three broke through the line of the Philistines. 3 of them. There's a whole garrison of Philistines there protecting the place. These were mighty men. We saw that some of them would kill hundreds at one time. They broke through the garrison of the Philistines and went straight to that gate in front of all the Philistines who were backing back and said, what are we going to do? Well, you can imagine that two of the mighty men are sort of holding back the Philistines, and one's getting the water from the well into a beautiful container, and away they ran. A few scratches on them, yeah, okay, they got through, and they ran back down to David. Now, David had never asked them to do that. He never asked them to do that. He just said, I wish, more or less, didn't he? I wish I had some. Well, that was good enough for them. That was good enough for those mighty men. Such was the respect and the love that they had for David as a leader. That was enough for them. And so they ran back to a cave. And they got this jug trying not to spill it, and bring it up to David. And David said, where have you been? We put the water from the well of Bethlehem, your well. He was stunned. Absolutely stunned that these men would do that for him. And he felt so embarrassed, perhaps. He was shocked. He couldn't believe that people would do that to him. He felt unworthy. He was never a lordly leader, was he? A lordly leader would have said, yeah, give it to me and drink it all the way down. Not David. He was one with his men. And he realised the sacrifice that they'd made. And he realised the 3 of them could have all died. But they had taken up their cross for David. And he poured it out. Poured it out before the wall as a living sacrifice to God. A quick offering. A libation. I am unworthy, he said. Only God is worthy of that level of sacrifice. God forbid. Shall I drink the blood of these men that have put their lives in jeopardy? When the jeopardy of their lives they brought it, they wouldn't drink it. This is that which came by water and blood. Even Jesus Christ, not by water only, but by water and blood. They were living sacrifices. The spear pierced the side of the Lord, and out came the bread and the water. The kind of devotion that these men had for David is so much like the devotion that we should have for our Lord Jesus Christ. Thankfulness, appreciation, the love of Christ, as the Apostle Paul, constrains us. It's like restraining, but we're restraining to get closer to Christ, in a sense. Because we thus judge that if one died for all, then we're all dead. He died for all, that they which live should not henceforth live unto themselves, but unto him that died for them and rose again. We are constrained by what Christ has done for us. We really need to be sensitive and appreciative of all that has been done for us in our straits. Romans chapter 5 puts it this way. The Apostle Paul says, when we were yet without strength, Christ died for the ungodly at the right time. For scarcely for a righteous man will one die, a righteous man, but for a good man, some will even dare to die. A righteous man is, a man who is upright, perfect, never done anything wrong. You wouldn't really die for a person like that. But a good man, the word good means a benevolent man, a man who does things for others. That's what the Greek word means. A good man is an outgoing man, a man who makes sacrifices for other people. You might be prepared to die for somebody like that, perhaps. But God commends his love towards us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Now I think that's how David felt. He felt so unworthy of this wonderful love and sacrifice and willingness that these his disciples were prepared to show for him. These things did the mighty men, and David knew now that he had brilliant men with him. He had wonderful men with him. These were men of God. These were men who were prepared to lay down their life for the cause. These are people in the ecclesia we need, brothers and sisters, who are prepared to make the sacrifices. To hear something would be nice to have, and we'll go ahead and do it. They don't have to be instructed in the ecclesia to do certain things. They see an opportunity, there's something that needs to be done, and they'll step in and do it to their own cost, without reward. These are the sorts of people that David now knew that he had around him. So here we are. The Philistines are back. David and his men are in the cave of Bethlehem. The water's been poured out. People have respected David even more as a result of that. But he was prepared to give all. He wasn't a taker, he was a giver. And he was a leader. And he knew that the people with him were going to be supported as they would go up to do battle with the Philistines for this final time. Well, we're back here again in the valley in the river of Rephaim. There's no river running now because it's in the dry time, the dry season. And David and his men have burnt the idols of the Philistines that they left after the battle. The Philistines are back in the dry weather. And we're here, and the question is, what about the mulberry trees? What about the mulberry trees? This is about the situation that is talked about in 2 Samuel chapter 5. We'll go back to that again. Can you see any mulberry trees there, by the way? Can you see mulberry trees? Anybody got silkworms at home, mulberry trees? Do they look like mulberry trees to you? They don't look like mulberry trees, do they? Well, 2 Samuel chapter 5, let's go. Samuel 5 and verse 22. Valley of Rephaim, breach of waters. Philistines came up yet again, verse 22, and spread themselves in this valley of Rephaim. And they think, well, we're not going to get flooded out this time, we're safe. So David inquired of Yahweh, and he says now, what will I do? I've got good men with me, what can I do? Yahweh says, thou shalt not go up, but fetch a compass behind them, and come upon them over against the mulberry trees. And let it be, when thou hearest the sound of it going in the tops of the mulberry trees, that then thou shalt bestir thyself, for then thou shall Yahweh go before thee to smite the host of the Philistines. And David did so, as Yahweh had commanded him, and smote the Philistines from Geba until thou come to Gaza. Now just on the map, here we are. David's in the cave of Adullam in the green. He comes up to the valley of Rephaim. They do put the Philistines to flight. The Philistines retreat right up to Gibeon, which is Geba, same place, and then across to the west, all the way back to their own territory, to Gaza. Okay, so that's the path of what takes place. The valley of Rephaim, and they retreat north and then west back to their own land. Now, interestingly in this, it's very interesting to have a look at, remember we said it's Mount Perazim. Let's go to Isaiah 28, because Isaiah 28 refers back to this time, to this battle. And in Isaiah 28, God says, yeah, that was something to remember what happened then, and it can happen again. Well, Isaiah 28, in verse 21, we read that Yahweh shall rise up as in Mount Perazim, as back then when the Philistines were put to flight from the valley of the giants up to Mount Perazim and beyond. He shall be wroth as in the valley of Gibeon. Remember, that's where we said they fled to first of all. that he may do his work is strange work, and bring to pass his act is strange act. Strange means strange, unusual, scary, strange act. And this is all about the mulberry trees. So it's called now a strange act. It's like, Armageddon. This is really typical of Armageddon, because the enemy is coming up to the king in Mount Zion to try and depose the king. It's Psalm 2 all over again, isn't it? Isaiah 28 verse 16 says, I lay for a foundation, this is the same chapter, a stone, a tried stone. I lay it in Zion, a precious cornerstone, a sure foundation, and he that believeth shall not make haste or shall run away ashamed. This is, I have set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. This is really pointing forward to the concepts that we see in Armageddon, where a strange thing is going to happen. What's going to happen? Earthquakes, hail, fire and brimstone, strange works. Works where God brings nature to bear upon the enemy. And the Philistines are trying to depose God's king in Zion. Why did the heathen rage? This is the Philistines. The people imagine a vain thing. The kings of the earth set themselves. They take counsel. They're coming against Yahweh's anointed David. Let's break his band asunder. But God's king is established in Zion. I'll speak to them in my wrath and vex them in my sore displeasure. I have set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. So we've got a typical situation here where God's king has been set in Jerusalem. That's King David. The Philistines are after him, but he's going to come towards Jerusalem from a different direction. So, the Philistines, back in 2 Samuel 5, have spread themselves in the valley of Bethlehem. David says, what am I going to do? God says, don't go directly up, but fetch your compass behind them and come over against the mulberry trees. Now the word mulberry trees is actually the Hebrew word, the word baka. Baka. The weeping trees. Weeping trees. Why are they called weeping trees? It's the future valley of Baka, which, you go up and the rain fills the pools. There's Psalm 84. Of course, as we said, in the winter, the rain fills the pools in that area. But this is that same valley. Let it be when thou hearest the sound. And the word sound here, you might like to make a note, is the word voice. The voice. And so there's a voice, there's weeping, and there's the sound of it going. Now the word going actually means marching. The sound of marching. So there's going to be a strange moaning, wailing, weeping amongst these trees, what we might have thought were mulberry trees, but these trees that make a moaning, wailing, weeping and a rising sound of a marching army. I want us all to imagine, that we're in the Philistine army and it's getting on towards nightfall. And we know that David's somewhere. We think he might be in Jerusalem, but we're not really sure where he is. Last time he came on us suddenly when the waters rushed down and we were all defeated. What's going to happen this time? Well, it's getting dark. Soldiers are thinking, well, maybe some of us might go off to sleep. The cook might be, finishing up with the food. The roustabouts are just organising things down in the valley there. And everything seemed quite calm, we would think. David and his mighty men, and the Philistines flee for their lives. And it was a long time before the Philistines gave too much trouble again.